And we have some media from Ramdas, an audio excerpt, and it's around, so of course the theme is relationship, interconnectivity, and interbeing. And Ramdas was he very much was in his body, and his concern for himself and all of us in terms of the interpersonal relationships that we have and getting them straight. You pretty much have to have that cleaned up before you, or at the same time as you think about how we are all so interconnected. I mean, and so I think this is like a formative talk that he used to give often. So you guys at the audio desk there, can you play Ramdas's talk on relationship?
When I look at relationships, my own and others, I see a wide range of reasons for people to be together and ways in which they are together. And I see ways in which relationship, which means something that exists between two or more people, for the most part reinforces people's separateness as individual entities. And it doesn't just honor it, it treats it as the reality of it. When I perform, or I used to perform, I don't anymore, but I used to perform weddings. I had a license for a while. It was revoked by the temple here at Hanuman Temple. Yeah, his was too. We used to be able to perform weddings. And I do a lot under the table. Or I used to. But the image I always have when I'm performing a wedding is the image of a triangle in which there is the two partners, and then there is this third force, this third being that emerges out of the interaction of these two. And that the third one is the one that is the shared awareness that lies behind the two of them. And that the two people in the yoga of relationship come together in order to find that shared awareness that exists behind them, in order to then dance as two, so that the two-ness brings them into one and the oneness dances as two. And that's a kind of a vibrating relationship between the one and the two, so that people are both separate, and yet they are not separate. And they're experiencing that the relationship is feeding both their uniqueness as individuals and their unitive consciousness. Now, that's extremely delicate, because it's so easy to get entrenched in your own, I need this, I want this, you're not fulfilling this for me, and seeing the other as object. But the delight which all of you have experienced of being with somebody where you are sharing an awareness of the predicament you are both in. And you're sharing an awareness of the predicament, even when you're having an argument with each other, there's an awareness that you're both almost delighting in the horrible beauty of it. I don't know whether any of you have had that. I've had it quite often, because I'm around pretty conscious people a lot of the time, and we fight, we have differences, but we're hating it and enjoying it both, because there's these levels that we're playing at all the time. And, but we come into relationship often very much identified with our needs. I need this. I need security. I need refuge. I need friendship. I need this. And All of relationships are symbiotic in that sense. We come together because we fulfill each other's needs at some level or other. The problem is that when you identify with those needs, you always stay at the level where the other person is her or him that is satisfying that need. And it really only gets extraordinarily beautiful when it becomes us, and then when it goes behind us and becomes I. So when I ask you which person are you saving or protecting, or whose integrity you're protecting, I understand that to enter into the yoga of relationship is an extremely difficult thing to do. It's the hardest yoga that I know of, actually, because your ego is so vulnerable when you start to open up to another human being. You feel so tender and so vulnerable. And before that one place gets going strong enough, you get frightened and you pull back and you get entrenched. And that happens all the time in relationships. People that come together with the greatest meaning of feeling love, and then they get caught in their needs and their frustrations and they separate. One of the problems is that we tend to put relationships a little bit on the back burner in life. We get a relationship and then we go out to a job and we go out to other things, and we sort of, now we've got that together, we'll go do life. And for a relationship to be a yoga of relationship is like a full-time operation for years. I mean, for me, one of my examples is Stephen and Andrea Levine. Stephen and Andrea used to be really nice, friendly, sociable people before they met. This is on a tape, too. And then they met. I used to like Stephen. And then they met, and they really started to be together, and the amount of energy that had to go into staying clear with each other. Because what happens is so much goes down so fast in relationships, it's really hard to process it fast enough to keep clear. So you keep getting this kind of residual of old stuff that isn't quite digested enough, and you end up separate from the person because you didn't have time to stop and kind of work it through, clear it, and so on. So what they did was they moved onto land with no telephone and put up a big sign, no trespassing. And they just started to work with one another. And after some years, during which you really felt like you were cut off as a friend. And it was hard for me, because I had counted on Stephen a lot for sharing consciousness. And then after a while, they began to open up to me and allow me in. And then I began to see the effect of that. I began to see what happens when people learn how to really open, trust, meditate together, keep emptying, keep clearing, work until they are a shared awareness. And if you watch them when they're teaching together, when they're on the platform, or when they're together, they've done some extraordinary work. They still have a lot of work to do. I mean, they're not cooked by any means. But they have done some really good stuff together. And that's hard, and it's rare. It's rare. I, on the other hand, have gone into relationships and realized that I can't hear my own truth in the relationship, and I've had to stop it. Because I wasn't willing to surrender the life games that I was in for that relationship. It just wasn't worth the effort. I treasured what I was doing in my life too much to invest in that relationship that deeply. So I've heard it both ways. Do you hear that? Do you hear what I'm saying? It's not fair to say that any relationship that isn't involved in the yoga of relationship is not useful and fulfilling to people. Because a lot of people come together because it's just really comfortable living with another person, and there's a wonderful kind of sweet intimacy, and it's fun to cook with each other and fun to sleep together, and it's fun to just live life together without trying to get too deep in as a spiritual practice. And many of those people have other spiritual practices. They go off and meditate, and one does something else, a Tai Chi or something else. And that seems fine to me. I don't think you should make believe that a relationship is really yoga unless you're willing to really put the effort into making it such. And if you are, it really fills all the space for a long time. Am I hearing the issue clearly, or do somebody want to say anything about that? When I'm in a relationship with somebody else, and what they do upsets me, because I understand that my life experiences are the gift of my guru in order to bring me to God, that if somebody upsets me, that's my problem. This is a hard one, because we don't usually think these ways in this culture. What I see other people I see them as like trees in the forest. You go into the woods and you see gnarled trees and live oaks and pines and hemlocks and elms and things like that. And you're not inclined to say, I don't like you because you're a pine and not an elm. You appreciate trees the way they are. But the minute you get near humans, you notice how quick it changes. There's a way in which you don't allow humans to just manifest the way they are. You take it personally. You keep taking other people personally. All they are mechanical runoffs of old karma. Really is what they are. I mean, they look real and they think they're real, but really what they are is mechanical runoff. So they say, "Rrr," see, and you karmically go, "Rrr." And then one of you says, we've got to work this out. And the other says, yes, we must. And then you start to work it out. And it's all mechanical. It's all conditioned stuff. I mean, I'm really being, okay. Lost one. So that if somebody comes along and gets to me, they get me angry or uptight, or they awaken some desire in me. Wow, am I delighted? They got me. And that's my work on myself. If I'm angry with you because your behavior doesn't fill my model of how you should be, that's my problem for having models. No expectations, no upset. If you're a liar and a cheat, that's your karma. If I'm cheated, that's my work on myself. My attempting to change you, that's a whole other ballgame. What I'm saying is, I will only be happy if you are different than you are. You're asking for it. Really asking for it. Think of how many relationships you say, I really don't like that person's this. If they would only be this, if I can only manipulate them to be this, I can be happy. Isn't that weird? Why can't I be happy with them the way they are? You're a liar, a cheat, and a scoundrel, and I love you. I won't play any games with you, but I love you. It's interesting to move to the level where you can appreciate, love, and allow in the same way you would in the woods, instead of constantly bringing in that judging component, which is really rooted out of your own feelings of lack of power. Judging comes out of your own fear. Now, I fall trapped to it all the time, but every time I do, I catch myself.
There's an awful lot there to think about. I've heard this many times and had to make a couple of notes, because no matter how many times you hear something, suddenly one day you hear it differently, especially with Ram Dass. So maybe we can just talk about how that felt to each one of us in terms of our personal experience. For me, the shared awareness that he was talking about, I think, is the most powerful ally that we can have in a relationship. And as he said, the yoga of relationships is a full-time job. I think we all know that, though. And that doesn't have to be just with a partner. It can be with a family member, can be with somebody that you work with very closely. So I think it applies across the board. So I'm going to give it over to Mirabai and just some reflection. Right?
I love the tree metaphor that Ram Dass uses for all kinds of reasons. We know that under the ground, I live in New Mexico, by the way, near the Hanuman Temple in Taos, and I grew up there. And the aspen groves in New Mexico are all connected under the earth, right? I'm sure some of you know about this interconnectivity of tree roots. And I often see that as a metaphor for interbeing. Thich Nhat Hanh's beautiful term, interbeing.
JR, how about if I give Mirabai this wireless? Take mine?
Or that, I think I'm back.
Oh, there you go.
So the trees appear to be separate on the surface, but they're actually one interconnected being. So that is a metaphor that I live with a lot. The other metaphor that reminded me of is Martin Buber, the great 20th century Jewish philosopher, mystic, who wrote the famous book, I and Thou. And I think Ram Dass was kind of speaking about that. There's this illusion of separateness in any relationship, not just a romantic partnership. I mean, to some extent it's true. We are also separate beings. But there is this beautiful way that Buber explains what he means by an I and thou relationship, right? Toward the beginning of the book, I know some of you are familiar with it, but he talks about an I-it relationship, which is the way most of us function. And Ram Dass used to speak about Buber. And the I-it relationship is I'm the subject and you're the object, and I just relate to you as this thing that either fills my needs or doesn't. But when you have an I-thou relationship, in some ways it's spontaneous. It's also kavanah, or intention. I'm going to relate to you and to everyone and everything that I can as that I-thou space that's this beautiful blend of intention and grace. And in any relationship, I have it with my partner, Gangadas, when we intend to see the beloved in our beloved, we clear a possibility for that to happen. We can't guarantee it, but we create the conditions where an I-thou relationship becomes possible. So we practice seeing each other as trees, as Ram Dass says.
Let's use this.
I think hers is working now.
No, they're telling me it's not. It's rebooting. Try that.
Oh, okay, I'm finished.
It's work. They fixed it.
How about this? This sounds much better. Duncan?
How about this?
Yep.
This is working.
Did you all hear a word I said?
Yeah, no, we
Okay.
did everything.
Great. It was great.
Okay, just checking.
How about giving us some of your relationship wisdom?
Well,
I mean, wait a minute. The truth is, you have quite a wonderful relationship who's sitting right over there.
well, I mean, we are married, so that I don't want to put out some utopian fantasy of like, well, I mean, I can't wait to look at you like a tree. We got kids. We got kids and a mortgage and Ram Dass married us. Yeah, Ram Dass married us, and it's a very to me that, I always think the story over and over again. I certainly won't do the whole thing. Let's go meditate for 10 more years. Excuse me. He comes back.
Shared awareness.
Right.
So that's great, really great. Here's something from Ram Dass. There is a way of shifting consciousness so that you see that you're one in the form of many. You understand that a starving person or a frightened person is you. Then the whole trip of quote unquote, what's good for me? What do I want? What do I need? Becomes less interesting. And that changes the universe. That's so great. That is truly Ram Dass, right? I mean, just amazing. My feeling is that we should be a little bit interactive here. I think everybody has this is the most common experience of all is our interrelational lives. And every one of us has that. So I was thinking, I don't know what you all think, it'd be nice to have people bring up whatever it is that popped up listening to Ram Dass and just the idea of how do we transmute. And I think what you just said, Duncan, actually, that before I start to give spiritual advice to my wife, I turn it on myself. Yes. I think that's actually a really wise thing to do. So anybody who has anything to say or questions, Matthew is right there.
And before we begin, just inviting you to distill your sharing to its essence so that there is time for everybody. And the only other thing I want to say is that we haven't said yet is check your preconceptions about perfection. So many of the spiritual traditions are patriarchal. They can't help it. They were written by and for men. And so they fit a certain construct of purification, perfection, getting it right. And so as we explore this topic, I feel like it's really important to give ourselves permission to fuck it up in relationship and find the gold there.
Yeah, it would be a big problem if we thought that wasn't going to happen. A screw up here and there. We've done a bunch of podcasts together where Duncan has shared many of those moments, and so have I. And
if you need help fucking up your relationship, talk to me. I'm good at that.
All right, anybody has any kind of feedback or just question? You all have perfect relationships and don't need any kind of discussion around.
While you're thinking, Duncan, when you were talking about that classic story of the guru saying, come back when you've practiced more, I thought you were going to tell that story about, I think it's a Sufi story, about a guy who comes to a master and tries to learn everything he can, and he just keeps getting it wrong. He just can't get what the master's telling him. He just messes it up. And finally, the master just leaves, and he rows off on his boat, and he's in the middle of the lake, and suddenly he hears the splashing, right? You guys know the story? And then he looks over, and the guy is walking across the water saying, "Excuse me, what was that one part I was supposed to do about touching?" I feel like that's us. We think that we don't get it, and we're just so filled with love and mastery, we just have no idea.
I love that.
Behind you over there, Matt.
Yeah, so thank you. Adding to the...
A little louder.
So this is Annika. Hi.
Hi.
And I just want to add to your thought on that patriarchal getting it right system and how it's just embedded it's ancestrally embedded in all of us. And I am now a grandmother, and so like I've been watching my children grow, and now my grandchild. And when you guys talk about this, I think so much about just the face of the child, because it's right there. That's the love that we're all seeking. And if we can just stop the needing to get it right, needing to know that this is the system that we must follow, because it's that wisdom that comes from within, and we know it because it comes from who we are, like decades and years, and yeah. So.
Thank you. Matthew.
Good morning. I'm Dave, and I'm a fellow traveler. I'm sorry. I'll move the mic a little bit. I met Ram Dass in 1986, a few years ago. And I met him because at the time, my wife had been diagnosed with terminal liver cancer, and she wanted to meet this guy. And I called Ram Dass, and he said that he would meet with her, and he did. And I said to him, well, I want to pay you for your time. And he said very simply, that's quite all right. That's just what I do. And I was so moved by that. It's like, you really don't have anything else to do but work with people that are dying? It's like, wow. I mean, and I had a chance to watch him interconnect from last night with my wife on a level that I had never learned in college or psych classes or anything else. It was a dimension that that I feel here with all my fellow travelers. And the lady behind me talked about our grandkids, and I was there when both of my grandkids were born, and they just looked in my eyes. And I remember what Ram Dass said to me once, I'm in here, are you in there? With just the eyes connecting. And that's the gift that we have here, that is unconditional love that radiates, but it comes from the heart. And that is where I believe, for me, love really lies. And I learned that here many years listening to Ram Dass and all of you teachers. And I'm blessed to be here and feeling this interconnection. Thank you for letting me share. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Really, it just points to, in terms of listening to what Ram Dass just said from the talk, the shared awareness. I mean, again, that really struck me as our modus operandi for all walks of life in terms of our relationship with people. And of course, that unconditionality that you talked about, sometimes it's more difficult one-on-one than it is in a group like this, especially with the intention that we all have. And so it's good to remember that, for sure. Go ahead.
I'm pretty young. I'm 26. And I have a question. So there's a song by Hozier that says, I fall in love just a little bit every day with someone new, or something like that. And And then the second part of it is that in practicing non-attachment and not being very attached to the outcome of a certain situation, or, that can also apply with relationships. And so my question is, I have been in love before, and I know what the feeling is, but going forward, I am single right now, in case anyone was wondering. So yeah, like those two things, the non-attachment part, and then the everyone's just so wonderful, Like I see this person, like, wow, that person's like me, like they're so awesome, and this person's different. They're so awesome too. So how did those two things kind of like marry, and then transcend into like a monogamous relationship, and being like, oh, this is the person that I want to do this thing for the rest of my life with, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I just said it made sense. I don't have anything to say. No, I do. I think that, okay. What's wrong with actually finding fulfillment in a relationship and resting in it and allowing it to be refuge? I would say that my monogamous relationship, after having a couple of practice husbands before this one, is that it becomes this root, this garden, this taproot, something like that. And from that place, I'm safe to love the world and to fall in love. I'm like you. I fall in love with people every day. Their awesomeness and beauty just explodes through them, and I'm like, oh my God, I love you. And I'm safe to love them because of the refuge of my relationship. It's not perfect, but it is my temple, and I go there and refill, and that creates the safety. Do you see what I'm saying? For me to then respond to the world with my heart open.
Yeah, I do. I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
P.S. Try polyamory. Polyamory is for people who like meetings more than sex. Because all you do is have meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. So monogamy is way better. I promise you.
Less meetings.
Go monogamy, unless you love meetings. If you like meetings. Thumbs down over here. Okay, I guess. Sure, why not?
But I don't judge you.
Yeah.
That's my wife's boyfriend, everybody.
Oy.
Oh, God.
Hi. So I've heard that talk several times, and there's a part when he's talking about needs and I love what you said about the I-thou relationship. And there's the, like, this plane of it, and then there's the, like, battling it out every day plane of it. And this idea of, like, attachment, of, like, avoidant attachment and insecure and codependency and counterdependency. And I just want to hear you all talk about the theme of this, which is like the interdependency. Does that make sense? Ish?
Yeah, no, absolutely. As I think I said before, that glimpse that Duncan was talking about, where you start to have a relationship from within with divine presence, whatever you want to call it, true self, and then you're able to step into a relationship where you recognize that in yourself, and then you start to recognize it in your partner or whoever it may be. And then that allows the dawning of, wait a minute, there's a bigger connection going on between us. And that includes the person, Sharon has that great story of Sharon Salzberg going into the grocery store and really meeting somebody, complete, in a shared awareness. And then you start to realize that, of course, Ram Dass later said, well, you got to be careful, because you get into that spot And then whoever you meet down the street, you smile and they smile back. And it's not a matter of going and collecting all these people. You'd have quite an entourage. It's a matter of recognizing that place in ourselves that enables us to be able to connect in that way, not just with people close to us, but to strangers, and realize the interconnectivity of it all. You know? So that glimpse, I like that. That's that glimpse, yeah.
Yeah, and like understanding the difference between interdependency and codependency and how they're complete. It's opposites. Like one of them, you're sort of depending on some sentient phenomena around you to be aligned in some perfect way, along with probably a lot of other things. And then that's when you're going to feel great. And that's when you feel love. And that's that's a brutal way to live. And this whole idea of like, and Ram Dass would talk about this so much, and it was one of my favorite things that he taught is we work on ourselves so we could help the people around us. And and somewhere in there, I think there is a possibility of seeing that, whatever that may be, the transcendent glimpse, that beautiful, this sky mind is what you'll hear in Buddhism sometimes, the place beyond the clouds, beyond the framing of the mind. And then you'll probably forget about it if you're me, but you remember you caught a glimpse of it so that the next time things in your interpersonal relationships aren't in the very moment meeting your needs for what your ideal, this is what harmony looks like or stability looks like, you can maintain this a real calmness rather than like suppressing all the anger, until whatever you do, until whatever your thing is, I'm not going to say what I do, but you could get this nice, calm place that's real. And I think that's a real gift. Like if you're looking to give things into the world right now, this is something Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche said, he said, before you get caught up in any of the isms, communism, socialism, capitalism, whatever your ism may be, see if you can find harmony in your family. Find harmony in the people directly around you. Or as Jack says, tend to the part of the garden you can touch. That's that. And so how to find that harmony if you are always like rattled by the shifting sands of Maya? How to find that harmony? So once you can catch that glimpse maybe, and then you have the family around you where there's a reason to catch the glimpse, to really do the work that Ram Dass is talking about, then I think maybe that ripples out into the world. And that those ripples, that is potentially what could create lasting change and for the positive.
Mm. Yeah. You talked about practice. We all talk about practice all the time, and Jack is going to, with Trudy, speak to it as well in terms of the ways in which we can transform internally to be able to have any kind of relationship or realization of interconnectivity. And of course, a lot of times we practice and we feel like fakers.
Yes.
So I'll just, because this is important, because it's easy to get lost in just despair because you feel like you're really not doing it. You're just doing it out of habit or something. And so this is, I don't know if Krishna Das is here. If he was here, I'd get him to tell him the story. A story he tells that happened. He came to Maui and he went to come, Ram Dass used to go swimming in Kihei, and he came late and Ram Dass was already in the car. And he was sitting there and he had a depressed look on his face. Krishna Das said, "What's going on? What's up?" And he looked at him, he said, "I'm a faker, and so are you." Krishna Das was like, "Oh, really?" And he thought about it for a minute, and then he said, "But we're real fakes." Duncan and I were talking about this last night because that's so important, really, to cut through the place in which we despair over whatever we feel we're not accomplishing, or we're not able to fulfill in the fullest manner what it is that we do on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, don't despair. And practice is, of course, part of practice is mindfulness about despair or whatever's uncomfortable. Actually, one day, K.C. Tuari, who there's a movie called Brilliant Disguise that we're going to see in a couple of days, who was a mentor of ours back in the day. It was Krishnadas's Indian father. You've probably heard him talk about it. But he was walking with KC one day, and KC said, who was a extraordinarily had the gift, the siddhi of being able to be absorbed into the deepest meditative samadhis, said, you know, he said, Baba, there's no point to this. You know, you keep repeating Ram, 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 and, you know, it's said in such fakery, nothing's going to happen. He says this to Maharaji. And Maharaji said, no, that's true. But you just keep repeating it, because there might be that one moment that it's completely, you realize in that moment the truth of Ram. And so we just keep pushing forward. And that applies to all of the thoughts that we're having around relationship right now, in terms of, we realize that the shared awareness that we're cultivating with a partner is going to have plenty of pitfalls. But that's not going to stop us from moving in that direction, because that's why we got on the path in the first place, is to have a more whole, complete life that includes that shared awareness no matter what we're doing within ourselves, and where you get the glimpse, as Duncan described, and all the way to working through what may sometimes seem unsurmountable issues with people.
Just thinking that right now there might be people sitting among us who are going, well, I'm not in a partnership. I haven't been for a long time. I may never be, or may never be again. And so what about me? I don't know. Is anyone feeling that? You don't have to raise your hands. I don't want to embarrass you, but... And so, you know, I often think about this in terms of the highest mitzvah in Judaism is to make love with your partner on Shabbat, right? This, many of you know this. What if you don't have one? People often ask. And so cultivating this kind of intimacy as a yoga can happen with everyone in our lives, and can happen in direct form with our Ishta Deva, our deity of choice, the one that really resonates with us, or any other version of beloved that we long for. So I just don't want to leave out those of you for whom partnership is not a yoga at the moment and may never be.
But we're talking also about all familial relationships, family, friends.
Yeah.
They're
Satsang.
they all are part and parcel to the same thing we're addressing now. Go ahead. I don't know where Matthew went. Oh, I think somebody over there. A couple of people.
So this is to Duncan. I have a 31-year-old son named Abe, and it's hard as a mom to find commonality with a 31-year-old son, or especially 10 years ago, but you know, in their early 20s and so on. So I just wanted to say that in terms of relationship, my relationship with him vastly improved one day when he told me to listen to the podcast that you had with your mother.
Oh, wonderful. That's great to hear. That's great to hear. That makes me so happy. Thank you for saying that. You know, this is why I think in Buddhism, people will often get confused and think this is a dreary religion. It's always talking about impermanence and suffering and death. But I think that the reason there's this emphasis on you must bring to mind that you are not here forever. You're going to die. And that's not a dismal, gloomy thing actually at all. It's a wonderful reality once you because it gives you a chance to be in the truth. And I know with my mom, my gosh, you just take your mom for granted naturally, especially 20s, 30s. It's so easy to just actually to be very annoyed with your mom. I mean, incredibly annoyed. And then all of a sudden, that you get the call where your mom tells you, oh, well, I'm only going to be here for a couple more years. And then at that moment, things get so real and beautiful and unbearable, really, just unbearable. So I know my mom would be so happy to hear that podcast had an effect on the relationship with your son. It definitely makes me happy. I hope it continues to be closer for the rest of your life together.
He related that as well, because your mother was an incredible, when I listened to her, she was a spiritual therapist, and her words were so profound.
Thank you.
Thank
you so much.
Hi, everybody. So I want to kind of point back to this whole notion of interbeing, and we've talked about it in terms of your intimate relationships, or if you don't have an interrelationship, individual relationship with your Ishtadevo or with everybody. And it feels to me like we have such an opportunity for practice of that here, because other than the people that that you came with or whatever, we're basically all strangers, and there are a lot of people who are here, myself included, just by themselves. And it seems like the places where we're interacting, at least so far, it's only been a day, right, is when we're at the dining table. And then it always starts with, hi, how are you? Where are you from? How'd you get here? And it's like, and then lunch is over. So my question is what are the practices? We have the practice of sitting together, but what are the interrelating, the authentic relating practices that we can develop in this community right now, over these few days, that really dive in on a personal basis like that?
Yeah, we do have some. In particular, Trudy, who you'll be meeting shortly with Jack. Trudy's right here. Trudy and Mirabai Bush are going to do a practice called Just Like Me, where people engage with each other about really, and you experience the commonality that we all have. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, really the one underlying factor for all humans is we all want to be happy. So it's a great practice. And also I think tomorrow we're going to play some other media from Ram Dass, which is really powerful, quite powerful, around our environment and our connectivity with the environment and each other. And I think we'll do some breakout groups. We'll try. We haven't done it here before because of sometimes mostly the weather, because we want to go outside because there's maybe too many of us to be in one room. But we're going to try and figure that out. So that's another way. And we do a lot of that. If you've ever looked up at ramdas.org or gotten the newsletters and so on, that we have all sorts of fellowship groups, and we do these online, and we have these themes, and then we break out together there.
Yeah, and I agree, and I really appreciate that. And I will also say that doing it online is not the same as being right here.
Well, now
and here's the opportunity.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, some of it is just, though, going into the restaurant or getting food and purposefully sitting with people you don't know. And yes, it's who are you, where are you from, and how'd you get here? But then something else can happen. And we've seen it over these many years of people connecting. And that connection lasts for sure. Matthew? Oh.
I have another question about parents. So I've actually found there's an irony for me in that a few years ago when I was very much focused on being somebody and professional and investor, time with my parents was in a sense easy. Their questions were around achievement and, what wins was I piling up? And as I've changed the focus of my life to family and this path and this journey, a distance has opened up that I think it's a little harder for them to understand. And I'm not sure how to break through that and how to reorient myself in my time with them. And I'm feeling a little bit of confusion around that. So any thoughts would be appreciated.
I'm just thinking about the last question about how to have authentic conversation. I'm interpreting it that way, like beyond chit chat, and I hear a similar question here. How do I have a real relationship with my parents, my family, that's rooted in the reality of now and the ways that my life is unfolding? I think for many of us in this room, once we get on a spiritual path, that gulf does open with the people in our lives from before, especially our families. And what I've noticed is that, so I kind of make my living talking about this stuff and writing about this stuff, right? When I am with my family, we don't talk about that. And yet, I can feel their love and respect for me and for what it is that I do, without ever talking about it. And one time, recently, like within the last year or so, my sister said, "You never talk about your work with us. You never talk about how spiritual you are." And she really appreciated that.
Yes.
It was we just get to be with each other as we are and meet each other where we are. It's like trying to change someone's mind about politics. If you have the talking points at dinner with Uncle Bob, it's probably not going to go well. It's not authentic. And so, but if you radiate love to Uncle Bob, in spite of and including the ways in which his thinking is perhaps opposite of yours and maybe even dangerous, something does shift. I hope that's not too simplistic, Craig. I know you know this.
And that is something Ram Dass talked about all the time.
One of my uncles is actually in the
radiating
Taliban. And how do you get there? How do you get through? It's really tough. It's like, because he will kill, he'll kill you if you say the wrong thing. Like it's for his friends will, so it's tricky. But we work through.
He might have an uncle that's in the Taliban. That's the problem.
I do.
You do.
I thought I told you this. You don't know this? He's actually really mad at you, Raghu. I don't know why. He's like, mentioned you the other day.
Well, you got to get that glimpse.
What does
to grow.
fatwa mean? What does fatwa mean? Because he keeps saying that about you.
God help us.
Can I say so? This reminds me of something that Ram Dass said to me when I was asking him, when my first son was on the way, how do I be a good dad? And he said, dad, role. Son, role. Like these are roles. And especially when you have a family and you start waking up or whatever the word is, you start prioritizing love, compassion, personal evolution, service over career. This is a shift in role. What a massive shift in role. For me, my shift in role sadly has not been like going from like great career to like family, but more like going from like angry, raging, vengeful, passive aggressive, surly person to people in my family to realizing I don't want to hurt them anymore. I don't want to do that anymore. And then my problem is always wanting them to like realize, don't you see I've changed? Don't you see I've changed? Something like that. I'm different now, damn it. What, are you blind? So, but truly, you know, like having like ultimate patience, you know, realizing like this is not there. You know that saying, drive all blames into yourself? It's called Lojong mind training. Having that realization of like, oh yeah, the reason they're acting like this is because they still think that I'm the way I was in that place that was maybe not so great. And then having some patience and letting them come to their own, come around. They might come around, they might not. If they don't come around, this is our karma, isn't it? It's just, this is sort of what the seeds we planted. But I think I hope with some members of my family, eventually they will realize that I have like changed. But certainly it's not gonna happen by me calling up and telling them, you know, I've changed. You know, it's. I think it has to happen on you know, the trust has to come back. But that's a little different than your question. Yeah, I think I'm surprised your parents don't love that you're a dad now and have kids.
You know, this question actually was asked when we were with Maharaji back then by people who were same concern. What is it that I can do to make my parents have any understanding of spiritual life or what seems to be now important to me? I mean, however they said it to him. And he said what Ram Dass has repeated over all these decades. When you start to, he didn't say it like this. I mean, he said, your parents will change because of you, basically is what he said. And Ram Dass would say, you straighten out your heart, get your heart cleaned up, and you'll be radiating to everyone around you that love, that compassion, that peace. And that just goes all the way back. I keep referring to your glimpse, Duncan, because without that glimpse, there's no way to create the kind of space we're talking about. You know, Ram Dass used to call it the blue sky of awareness, where the clouds move, so suddenly your whole background is that awareness. And that can't happen until there's that glimpse, and you know, that's the work. Sorry, we can't take any more. We're already 1 minute over. We got to get Jack and Trudy up here, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.